Everyone. I hope everyone's keeping nice and cool in this hot weather, wherever you might be. It's great to see you guys and to be online and to be one of the first to be on this new channel, the CEDAW People's Tribunal. So absolutely thrilled to be here. We're live now and we're going to be talking about CEDAW for a change. No, it's a really, really important topic, so I love talking about it. I think I'll have it on my gravestone, something to do with CEDAW. Section 1 or Article 1 of CEDAW. Just kidding. I'm waiting for other people to join in as well. So what we're going to be talking about today is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination and why we started a People's Tribunal and how it's relevant to your life and how it's relevant to future generations as well. And then we'll talk, we'll just advertise the crowdfunder, which is being launched as well tomorrow. So hello everyone who's joining, and thanks very much. I can see on my screen here some of the comments and questions, and I've got some questions already that have been submitted. Great that you can hear me loud and clear. I'm absolutely thrilled about that, because I'm not raising my voice at the moment, but I can do if you'd like me to. Okay, great. So CEDAW passed in 1979 through the United Nations different committees and became a treaty then. And the first ratifications took place that year and signings. Now in the UK, we only took a couple of years to sign it. So in 1981, under Margaret Thatcher's government, she signed it and signed up to all of the provisions within there. There are some exceptions, and we still have what we call reservations to this day. One of them, very interestingly, that was taken away about 3 years ago, I think, something like that, it might be a little bit more, was about the crown succession. So that reservation talked about it will not be discriminatory against women if a son who's not the firstborn becomes king, because in the crown succession that we had, men were preferred. That exception has gone now, and that's no longer the case. Whoever is the firstborn is the person who takes over as queen or king. That's just an aside. I thought it was quite an interesting thing, and how far it demonstrates just how far reaching the CEDAW Convention can actually be. Anyway, we signed it in 1981. And if I were to sort of draw an analogy between signing it, what does that mean, and ratifying it, what does that mean? It's a little bit like getting engaged, where you promise, you betroth yourself to one man or woman, whatever, and you promise not to go, to make sure that you will get married, that you won't maybe stray, unless you have an open marriage, of course, you know, open relationship, that exists. Trying to be very careful here. But in the traditional sense, you betroth yourself to one individual. But it isn't until the marriage takes place and all of the official legal stuff gets sorted that you're actually married, and you can then be under the legal obligations, like, I don't know, if you buy a house together, then half of it is presumed to be for the husband and for the wife. And from there, you change the proportions. So it's a little bit like that. When you sign something, you're engaged, you get engaged. When you get married, then it's like ratifying a treaty. So it's not international, it might be an international marriage you have, but this is about international law. Ratifying then means that you will not pass any new laws, any new policies, anything that contravenes what it says in the treaty. That's what it means at its heart. And it also means that all 4 nations, so Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, will have responsibility, equal responsibility, to ensure that the articles of the treaty are adhered to and are followed. And don't forget that, because equality law is very different in the different parts of the UK. Ooh, hello from the Isle of Skye. Wow. I hope you have a lovely weather up there as well. I didn't realize I had to move this cursor in order to see the comments. Now I do. Cool. Okay, So it applies differently in Scotland, it applies differently in Wales, England, and Northern Ireland, because our equality laws are slightly different. However, let's put that aside for now and concentrate on CEDAW itself. So CEDAW then talks about stopping discrimination in its tracks. So you can't pass anything that is contrary to the CEDAW provisions and other human rights treaties, of course, that we've ratified. That's the theory. In practice, that's not the case, as Joanne Welch has said here. Do the UK has contravened CEDAW ratification over and over again? That's absolutely true. And one of the reasons that we want to have the People's Tribunal is to get the evidence together in so many ways how the UK has contravened CEDAW and why it has to stop doing that. One of the problems with ratifying an international treaty in the UK is our legal system. And I will be tiny bit technical here because I think it's important to explain. There are monist countries and dualist countries in the world. Oh my God, what am I talking about? Very simply, it means if you ratify an international treaty in Holland, for example, it automatically becomes part of their domestic legislation. In the UK, that's not the case. We have to pass another act of parliament before it becomes domestic law. Why is that important? And that's the whole point of getting legalistic with you and with this People's Tribunal. Because ratifying, it's very difficult with just a ratified treaty and not being transposed into domestic law to go to court and use it effectively. You can't use it in a tribunal, for example, employment tribunal and other things. You can refer to it, but it doesn't mean to say that the judges have to follow it wholeheartedly. And that's the big problem about international law and being a dualist country that the UK is. So what effect does that have? We've used CEDAW in the court case in back to 60, and judges have to take it into account, which they have. But that doesn't mean, but there's many other grounds. So we'll see when the judgment comes how they will interpret all of those grounds. And I'm hoping it is going to be a positive effect, definitely. So we've got people from all over the country who are part of this. Thank you very much. From Walney Island, Barrow in Furness, in Cumbria, in Middlesbrough, in Northern Ireland, all over the place. Thanks for joining. Lancashire, all over the place. Okay so far, everyone? I hope so. Good. So the CEDAW has 16 articles in it. I'm not going to go through all those. It's not a law exam, is it? Well, we could make it a law exam. No, I'm only kidding. So I've got a very strange sense of humour, maybe because I'm from Wales or so. But CEDAW is about not just stopping discrimination. It's about advancing women in societies. It's about recognizing that there's been past historical legislation that has seriously disadvantaged a whole bunch of women and girls, and we have to do something about it. The UK government has to do something about it, and within each of the nations as well. So, for example, where there's been legislation that has not allowed men and women to have equal pay, that's not allowed. Historical disadvantage that people have suffered under. The CEDAW goes further than our Equality Act and says, well, you've got to actually do something about that and give them restitution for it. There are also certain things that are within the CEDAW that we don't have in domestic legislation, which is like a hi from South Wales. Hello, Janet. Shumai. And Ammanford. Fantastic. And York. Oh my gosh, all over the place. This is great. The CEDAW also has something that is called a temporary special measure in it. And that's a really fantastic instrument, which there's a committee that examines every country in the world that has ratified the CEDAW, which is 189 countries in the world. 93% of the countries in the world have ratified it. That has said, well, wait a minute, the UK government doesn't use a temporary special measure enough. So it's told us off several times over different reporting periods. What is a temporary special measure? I hear you ask. Yes. A temporary special measure is an instrument that will not be seen as discrimination because it favors women and girls in its operation. So, for example, if you have one sector of the economy or one sector of the employment market that is completely dominated by men, you give equal opportunities. Both men and women can apply for these jobs, but it seems that men are the predominant number. Then a temporary special measure says, let's get women through the door more than men. They are just as well qualified. They may be differently qualified, and it's a recognition of different skill sets that is the vehicle to advance women and girls in society. What do I mean by that? This is about, and I used to teach this for about 12 years or so, making sure people understand that merit is more than just the paper qualifications that you've got. If you've been, for example, it's just an example, a mother with 3 children, and you got your children to soccer practice, that's the American term, football practice, ballet, and swimming, let's say, or you got your husband lunch ready in the morning, and you got your kids to school, and then you go off to a part-time job. That's a skill set that is absolutely phenomenal and that we need every day in our employment practices. That just because you weren't in an employment setting doesn't mean to say you haven't got those skills that are essential for a job that's before you. And what we need to do is have the job be matched to the person and their skills, not the skills to the job. There's a different way of looking at it. So you look at the whole person and you match their skills, rather than the job being so formalistic that people can't adhere to the qualifications, the paper qualifications that allegedly they need. So the CEDAW tries to look at all of those things. So in employment practices, it very much advances women and girls in society by recognizing their skill sets, their unique skill sets, and saying, if you want a temporary special measure, and you put those special measures in place, and you're advancing women into, for example, a workplace, then that's not discrimination. And I think that's quite right, because historically and stereotypically, and it also looks at stereotyping, there's been a big push for usually men or the male breadwinner model way of employment. And that's not good enough for our society, especially after COVID, or especially during COVID-19. We need to change. The world is changing and we need to change with it. I hope that made sense. That's a bit long-winded answer. But so managerial skill sets, exactly. It's how you package it as well. It's absolutely the case. Do we all have to go to an employment place? We know we don't now, don't we? We could work from home, most of us anyway, if you have a job or not. So that's just one example. So CEDAW looks at those kinds of things and says, right, there's another way of being. There's another way of organizing our world, and let's do that. I think that's progress. CEDAW also talks about a different kind of equality. What we have predominantly here is equality of opportunity, and that is a fantastic way of looking at life. It helps open doors for both men and women, girls and boys, in order to have educational opportunities, employment opportunities, or staying at home opportunities, all of those things. So you can't discriminate directly, again, on the basis of 9 protected characteristics. So for example, on the basis of race, which is absolutely right. And of course, being a female or a male. That only gets us so far, because as we know, there's unconscious bias. There's all sorts of things that come forward that people are not so keen on. Or, for example, the idea of merit, as I described just a moment ago, is very rigid in some places. So what we need to do is sort of make it different for a brave new world, for the 21st century. And what CEDAW does is not just look at equal opportunities, it moves the equality law further, and it says you've got to have substantive equality. That's got to transform society and the lives of women and girls in your country. And that's where we want to head to. because only in that way can we actually have full transformative equality for women and girls moving forward. Very important that. So it goes beyond just having an opportunity to apply. It's giving you, as the person who's applying, the vehicle, the methods, the tools in order to apply for a job, for example, or to have your full potential fulfilled. And it does that through, for example, a temporary special measure. It does that through making sure all of the societal aspects are covered. So whether it's the media, whether it's stereotyping, whether it's public or private, makes absolutely no difference. It's all covered within the CEDAW. So literally transforming society so that we can all live harmonious lives, our best lives that we possibly can. I hope that makes sense as well. So what is the action plan timescale for the CEDAW Travel and Reach? I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm still trying to explain some of CEDAW, but if that's, hopefully that is pretty clear what I've said so far. The only other thing I'd like to say about CEDAW is to give you a couple of examples of where CEDAW would make a difference and why we're pushing for the tribunal to go ahead. And then I'll answer some of the questions. I can go back and forth here and answer some of those questions. So, for example, when you have a human rights model, which CEDAW is, then you have a rights bearer, which means there's obligations on the state to fulfill your right, to make sure that your rights are fulfilled. So when CEDAW talks about adequate childcare, it means that the state, the UK government, the Welsh government, the Scottish government, Northern Ireland government, and the English councils, for example, have to provide adequate and affordable childcare, because only in this way can women and girls fulfill their full potential and advance in society. So how does that work? Well, the UK government, or the governments, have to respect that you have a right to childcare, and they have to refrain from interfering in the enjoyment of that right. Yeah? They have to prevent others from interfering with that right as well. And they have to adopt appropriate measures towards the full realization of that right to adequate, affordable childcare. Once something has been provided, it no longer becomes, if you like, a benefit. And I don't mean it in the benefits sense, but in terms of something that is just a nice thing to have. It becomes something that you'll have an expectation of receiving from the state. So, for example, adequate health care. There's an expectation on us, on the state, to provide that. And when it doesn't, then CEDAW says, if you're discriminating against women based on their age, their disability, their needs that are different to men, then that's not allowed. You have to get rid of it. You have to repair society, if you like. The same thing for press regulation. We have a lot of stereotyping, negative stereotyping of girls in particular in the press. And CEDAW says you're not allowed to do that, so you must get rid of it. All of those examples that I've just given, they are part of the international treaty, the ratification process. But if we had it CEDAW into domestic legislation, you could go to court and say, oi, over there, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you're not allowed to do that because that's against our law. So it works similarly to the Human Rights Act. And I can tell you that the Human Rights Act is litigated in the UK to a great extent and has enhanced our rights, in my view, tremendously. So that's why we're pushing for CEDAW to be incorporated into UK law. Hopefully, it will stop the erosion of women's rights and girls' rights, stop the erosion in healthcare, for example, stop the erosion of money going to care homes, for example, and allow girls to reach their full potential. So the tribunal then will look at, will gather all the evidence and how life would be very different if CEDAW were part of domestic law, and will come up, will lead that evidence through John Cooper QC. Now he's a fantastically brilliant QC, and we're so lucky, fantastically, that we've got hold of him, and he's agreed to do this through Joe, of course, and others who are working tirelessly in the background. We've got a steering committee that has been set up, and that is led by Dr. Davina Lloyd. Fantastic. We've got several people on the steering committee, including Mac, Louise, and Prafula. Have I left anyone out? I don't think so. Maybe I have. Oh, hope I haven't. Anyway, that's the steering committee. On the legal team, we have John Cooper, who's leading it, and he's going to present most of the evidence for the tribunal, and myself and Hannah Mansour. And anyone who's been involved with Back to 60 knows Hannah Mansour, who's been fantastic in helping out with the campaign and some of the live streams as well. But the People's Tribunal is larger than that. What we're trying to do is help women and girls throughout the UK to reach their full potential. So it's wider than that Back to 60 campaign, but certainly was Back to 60's idea, that's for sure. So if I can now turn to some of the questions, there are quite a few here. So I'm just scrolling down. Let me know if anything isn't clear and I can go over it. I know I probably sound very legalistic, but it's law is my background, so I've got a habit of going to my comfort zone, which is law. From Elizabeth, are women going to be taken seriously though, or just patted on the head again? From the tribunal, I don't think so, because the tribunal is a mechanism that was set up in the 60s and has been going intermittently since then. There was an Iran tribunal, which John Cooper also was lead counsel with, but there's also been other tribunals, and it's on the set of the inquests, and they're taken very seriously. Now we're not going to have a huge inquest like the Grenfell one, obviously, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to get witness statements together, experts as well, and John Cooper will be the main lawyer who will be testing the evidence in front of an independent panel of judges, and then we'll decide. Hopefully they will decide that incorporation is the right move, and we'll have some draft legislation for them for incorporation, and to have a representative on the CEDAW committee. In 40 years, we've never had one. We've never even nominated a person for the CEDAW committee, which just shows you how low down the priorities are. So we hope for the best, we plan for the worst. Always in women's rights, I've been doing this for about 20 odd years. You move forward a bit and you might move back a bit, but I know one thing: if you don't fight at all, you're not going to be given anything. And we know that from the suffragists and suffragettes that we have to keep fighting for our rights. If not, there'll be regression. And one thing's for sure: I'll keep fighting until my dying breath for rights in general, but for women's rights in particular. So hopefully we won't just be patted on the back. And even if we were to be patted on the head, then I'll still keep fighting. Makes no difference, because it was ratified, and we'll get there. We'll absolutely get there. I'm very confident in that. So yeah, women are excellent multitasking, yeah, and prioritizing people's skills, and excellent communicators, etc. Absolutely right, and that needs to be brought out much more in the merits and the skill sets that are required in job applications. Cool. What are the chances of 50s winning their case on the evidence being given, and what is CEDAW's view on this? Is it looking positive outcome for us? So that's a question about the Court of Appeal, I presume, hearing. We're going to be hearing what the outcome is in, I don't know, maybe September, maybe October. We'll wait to see what that's going to be. I'm pretty confident that it will be a positive outcome, but I can't second guess what the Court of Appeal will say. This is CEDAW People's Tribunal. So what this examines is whether it's a good idea to put CEDAW into domestic law, which is much wider than the pensions issue. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn, that you had to leave for work. Have a good one. Don't work too hard, as I always say. What's the action plan timeframe for CEDAW Tribunal to reach a goal? Well, we're looking at gathering witness statements now in the summer and into the September, and we're going to be seeing how fast that process is. We're going to be getting the panel of independent judges together, and then we'll be aiming for April, May time to hold the tribunal itself. Will it help our current appeal? Well, it's all symbiotic, isn't it? Putting pressure on governments in order to push forward women's rights is always a good thing, and it cannot hurt the appeal process at all. Would there not be a huge opposition from employers who might be forced to compensate employees for years of holding women back, or would this only apply in the future? It would be in the future, because we have a rule in British law that says laws cannot be retrospective. So what that means is that if there is monetary value involved, or if there was something that somebody did which in the future will be seen as a crime, but they committed it beforehand, and there's no criminal law that covers it, you can't be convicted of something which is not a crime at the time it was committed. So that wouldn't help. However, we ratified it in 1986, don't forget, and there are things that should have been put in place. And if those things haven't been put in place, and then it becomes domestic law, that's another matter. That's something to argue about later. Let's try and get it into domestic law to start with. Employers, a lot of this intersects with the Employment Rights Act, 1996, I think it is, and also the Equality Act 2010. So it gets a bit more technical now with trying to answer that question, because we have equality law that applies already for 9 protected characteristics. What we don't have is the intersectionality working very well. And that means being, for example, a woman who has a disability, who is discriminated against on the basis of those 2 things in comparison to a man who is able-bodied and, able-bodied. Trying to put that as a court case through the employment tribunals is extremely difficult. CEDAW doesn't do that. It looks at the whole person in total, and you don't necessarily have to compare yourself to someone. So that's where substantive equality comes in, and human rights talks about over time you have to make sure that all of these processes are in place. If you are a country from the first or second world, which we are, then the time frame is very short to put these things in place. Remember, CEDAW is a universal convention. It applies to Uganda, to Ghana, to Latin American countries as well. So the progress that we're talking about is differential. For the UK, that time frame would be very short. But any court case that would say, right, you haven't done this, you need to do it, would have a time frame attached to it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, yeah. Am I aware of the discrimination against women who have a private pension or widow's pension? Yes, a little bit. If the scheme was contracted out of SERPs, women receive no increase from the age of 60 on pre-88 GMP, whereas men receive an increase until they're 65. I can't speak to that. I'm not a pensions expert, so I'll have to leave that there. I'm sure other people can comment on that one. Any discrimination, I'll read you. I wasn't going to do this because I tested this on my 18-year-old son. He goes, oh my gosh, you're not going to do all that, are you? You're not going to talk about all of these provisions. But I'll just talk to you about Article 1 of CEDAW, what the definition of discrimination is. I'm sorry about this. I'm going back to the law. Discrimination against women shall mean any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on a basis of equality of men and women, of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, and any other field. So that means anything and everything is covered. So any distinction, exclusion, or restriction, and that's what that is in my view. Yeah. There are always ways a government can say, well, on this occasion, we're going to have an exception to this, but they have to justify it on very extreme terms. And that's what we want to get to. Okay, a government can do what it likes within reason. That reason has to be narrowed down. If we get CEDAW incorporated into UK law, the reason that they can do all these things becomes narrower and narrower. So the field of moving around is much narrowed, and that's what we're aiming for. Okay, has CEDAW teeth? CEDAW has some teeth, as I just explained with Article 1, but when it doesn't have as many teeth as if it were incorporated into domestic law, because then you have the full plethora of remedies available to use in the UK legal system. And that's different to Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also, of course, the overseas territories as well. So it depends where you are, but it also depends on what you're going for as well. And I won't go into that because I'll be here for another few hours, and I'd love to talk about it, but I think that's it. So you can get restitution through CEDAW. You can get legislation changed. You can get legislation passed in order to remedy situations, all sorts of things. What we really want is to put it into domestic law so individuals can use it to the best effect as well. Why do I think, well, what's the reason that governments haven't brought CEDAW into domestic law? And it doesn't matter which government you look at, whether it's Labour or Conservative or the coalition, none of them have done so. I think it's, well, the official reason, and this is documented in the UK government's response to CEDAW committee, which they have to report every 4 years on the implementation of CEDAW. It says that the Equality Act 2010 incorporates all of the provisions that we want women to have, and paraphrasing obviously. And if we gave women any more of the provisions of CEDAW into domestic law, they would have more rights than other protected characteristics within the Equality Act 2010. A short response to that is, we're not a minority, we're the majority. Women are also women with disability. They're also from BAME communities. They're also lesbian, and all sorts of things. So we can be whole individuals, not one particular protected characteristic. The comparison is not other protected characteristics and people in those categories or in those groups, because you're pushing down rights. We're supposed to be leveling up to the average white male. And that is not, if we don't incorporate CEDAW, as we've tried to, as we've seen for 40 years of equal pay legislation, 40 years of equality legislation, we're not going to get anywhere fast. So we need to change the way we do equality in this country to level up. So, yeah, women of ethnic origin, not only. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but obviously women from ethnic backgrounds are covered as well. Have you knowledge of CEDAW being stopped from implementation into law? Well, I've just explained that when we've asked, women's organizations have been on the ball on this for a number of years, many, many years, and I've been asking for incorporation for many years, and this CEDAW representative for many years. And the UK government comes back with the same answer year after year. There'll be a CEDAW interim report due in February of next year, and we'll see whether that goes ahead and what they've got to say about it. And I'm certain that this CEDAW People's Tribunal will put some pressure on the UK government to think again about nominating a CEDAW representative at the very least, let alone trying to incorporate some other things. We have to keep up the pressure because they're not going to do it otherwise. So Jackie, if a hospital trust invested money in, say, prostate cancer treatment to the detriment of funding ovarian cancer treatment, CEDAW would be instrumental as protective legislation. I think you can use it there, but of course we don't want to stop the testicular cancer treatment as well. But certainly if you can find that there's evidence of them doing one or the other, then that can be utilized. The Equality Act also can be utilized in this scenario already, because when you're using a comparator, then that's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm not an expert on every single law because this is healthcare law as well. So please, do remember that. But certainly, I know there have been cases or there have been instances where people have said that this has happened. It's finding the evidence to prove that. That's the difficult one. So what we have in this country is an individual litigation model where individuals have to find the evidence for themselves. What CEDAW tries to do is turn it around and make institutions advance equality, where you don't have to go through the court system. You're supposed to be able to you're supposed to be able to change the institutions rather than putting all the pressure on individuals to come forward. Yeah, because it's very stressful going to court, as you all know. Given that the Cummings-Johnson regime is trying to bypass Parliament using Henry VIII powers and reduce the power of the judiciary, could they bypass this? Well, I'm not sure what this is referring to. If you mean the People's Tribunal, well, it's an independent process. It's a grassroots movement we're pushing for. They're not going to stop the People's Tribunals going ahead, if that's what you meant. If you mean to incorporate CEDAW, we must have the government do that. We can't do it on our own. We have to put pressure on the government in order to do that. So they have to decide to do that. So I don't have a crystal ball to find out what this government will do next. I really can't. But you never know. Boris Johnson gave support for pensions and women in their 50s, born in the 50s. So you never know. You can't tell in this life. One thing is for sure, if we don't push this forward, it's not going to happen. Diane. So Heather's talking about, I've been trying to make changes in the workforce from the inside and had so much opposition, but get some results once I achieved senior roles. Yes, absolutely. We have to stand together and keep fighting. Yeah, absolutely right. Great, fantastic. Hello, Stevie from Chichester. Is that how you pronounce it? I'm really bad at pronouncing name places. Women of ethnic backgrounds are not only victims of discrimination of women's rights, but racial discrimination too. Exactly, that's the intersectionality aspect, which I don't think Equality Act addresses very well at all. And we have to do way more about that. I've been harping on about that for several years in my writings and things. And that's the other reason that I think it's really important to have CEDAW incorporated into domestic law. Am I right to think this is a devolved competency? To incorporate CEDAW as a treaty? No, it's not. That's up to the UK government. But nothing stops the devolved administrations from using the principles within the CEDAW already because the UK government ratified it. And devolved administrations have a responsibility to fulfill the international obligations as well. So for example, in Wales, and I know in Scotland it's very similar, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989 is used and is given due diligence within all legislative provisions. So there is scope of doing that. So I'll move on a little bit. I've got quite a few questions. I can't answer all of these. Yeah, more resources for Women's Aid, for example, that's a possibility, absolutely, because once you've had it, you're not supposed to have it taken away from you.
Could the UN help?
UN help?
Could the UN help get implemented? It's a question.
CEDAW. The UN already does try and, it tells the UK government every single time it should incorporate the provisions of CEDAW into domestic law. This is not a new ask, and women's organisations have asked for it for many, many years, and the UK government has been told to do it for many, many years, and it still won't do it because it simply says that women will have more rights in the Equality Act as compared to other protected characteristics, so therefore we're not doing it. And by the way, there's enough equality for women anyway, so they're covered. I think that's very derogatory, personally. What are the chances of getting CEDAW ratified into domestic law? 100% we can do this. If we band together and we push hard, we can do it. Absolutely, 100% believe that. I have 100% faith in that. Hello, Mac. Jackie with you, your supporters, back to 60, Joanne, and the rest of the team. We will not fail in getting CEDAW incorporated into domestic law. This is our time in history. Absolutely right, Mac. Always spot on, Mac. Yoch. Barrow Island or Barry Island? Oh, Barrow and Furness, yeah, okay. Okay, let's see what else is there. Yeah.
A question from Julia Jacobs asking how we can ensure that women of all ages can help expand knowledge of CEDAW.
So we've got the CEDAW People's Tribunal website, Facebook page, and Twitter account. I'd like to set up a TikTok actually, but we'll see whether that happens on or not. We'll see. Anyone with skills on TikTok, let me know. But we need to get into schools basically, and we need to talk to the girls directly and also the boys. One of the things I've been discussing with my 18-year-old son is, you know, what does equality look like to you? What does this mean? And of course, at 18, they're not concerned necessarily about pension rights or employment rights even, because they're off to university. So we need to get into the universities too. And one of the things I did, I taught about CEDAW at university with the course that I led there, well, several courses that I led at university. So we really need to get a campaign going in the schools and in the universities. As part of the PSE, we call it here, PSHE, I think it is elsewhere. We should have it part of that. And we're in discussion with I sit here in Wales, with the Welsh Government to try and move that forward. We really need it. And the CEDAW covers girls as well as women, of course. There's enough equality? Yeah, no, there isn't, obviously not. So let's see. Yeah, lots of questions. I think the government is in denial, often derogatory to women. It's why we must have CEDAW, absolutely right. Hello from the Wirral. I've only been up there once. It was absolutely gorgeous, I have to say. Beautiful. I need to go back there someday, hopefully soon.
Catherine Cuthbert asks, what's the procedure for getting it into domestic law?
What's the procedure for getting CEDAW incorporated into domestic law? It could be as simple as amendments to the Equality Act 2010 that incorporate some of the clauses of the CEDAW as an update to Equality Act 2010. Or it could be a separate act of Parliament. And there are many examples throughout the world of other countries who have incorporated CEDAW through both mechanisms, their own equality laws or through a separate act of Parliament. I'm personally, this is just a personal preference, I'm in favour of a separate act of Parliament so that you get it right first time round and it complements the Equality Act 2010. And you can make sure that things like intersectionality, so making sure women and girls of, for example, ethnic minorities or with a disability or who are trans or who are lesbian, whatever it is, are also covered, and it is made very clear that they are covered as well. And I think that's not particularly clear in the Equality Act 2010. Now, one of the things that Wales, and I believe in Scotland as well, has done or is about to do in March 31st in 2021, in Wales, the socio-economic duty will come online. That's Section 1 of the Equality Act 2010. It isn't operative yet anywhere, it wasn't enacted, in other words. And that really is about poverty, about class, and about making sure we take the economic and social situation of the person into account in policy and lawmaking as well. That and intersectionality and CEDAW put together will help tremendously going forward for women and girls. So it's working together, putting all those things together help us tremendously, I think. Nothing is foolproof. The law is just a start. We have to change society. But if you've got a law that says you've got to get rid of stereotyping and girls, being seen as victims all the time or being victimized on television, on television programs, and then being fully represented in all shapes and sizes makes absolutely no difference, then that's a major step forward. How optimistic am I about the positive outcome of the People's Tribunal? Very, because we've got first-class people doing it. And it's never been done here about CEDAW. I don't think it's been done in the world. And we'll get a lot of support from international community. And women's organisations are already on board. The Wales Assembly of Women is on board, which is an organisation that was created about 40 years ago to enhance women's rights here in Wales. NIWEP, the Northern Ireland Women's European Platform, is on board, and they've got tons of experience of doing like tribunal or inquests there. So, and the National Alliance of Women's Organisations, Sarin, who chairs it, is on board as well. So we've only launched about, 10 days ago, and we've already got lots of people on board who are wanting to see a positive outcome. Together we are strong. Divided, we are not strong at all. Hi Somerset and Liverpool. Have you any idea the percentage of MPs, especially females, who are backing CEDAW being written into UK law, or do they need re-education? Well, re-education is always good, but in a very nice and polite way, because we'll need their support in order to pass an Act of Parliament and to get it on the statute books. So we need to be, re-educate in a nice way and then push them forward to pass it into UK law, well, domestic law. We'll see. We've only just begun our work, and certainly there are many MPs that I could think of. I'll just name one because it just popped into my head. Jess Phillips, for example, all right, a Labour MP, not in government at the moment, but you never know. But there are many MPs who have worked in the sector who understand the importance of advancing women and girls in society through CEDAW and through human rights work in particular.
Julia Jacobs raises the point that many women don't necessarily understand that they don't have equality, and raising awareness about that actually.
Yes, then Julia, there are many people, and women in particular, and girls, or young women as well, who don't know that they haven't got equality. And it's when you come up against inequality that you actually realise how the cards are stacked against you. You don't necessarily need to know it when you're very young sometimes, because you're not faced with it. But once you do know, you have to do something about it. So many years ago, I was teaching about gender in the law as a course that I taught for many years. And I just had a throwaway line in the lecture saying, well, of course, men and women aren't paid the same. And there was outrage in the lecture theatres, about 50 or 60 people in the room saying, what do you mean men and women don't get paid the same? What are you talking about? I said, well, no, they don't get paid the same. So next week I came in with all the statistics and showed them, and they were absolutely flabbergasted by the fact that men and women don't get paid the same. They had no idea, because they had never been faced with it, never thought about it really. So I had, I'm very proud of this, quite a few females throughout the years when I've been, and ever since then it was always on the curriculum. Ever since then, because most students work, women have come up to me and said, oh, I went and I asked what a male colleague was earning. Most of the time they were earning the same amount, but often they weren't. and they got a pay rise through it. They challenged their boss and they said, no, you're not allowed to do that. This is unlawful. Therefore, give me a pay rise. And they got it. So once you know your rights, I think you can hopefully be empowered to assert it. It's more difficult in times of recession. I absolutely understand when you need the job. And that's why we need CEDAW incorporated into domestic law, because it puts the onus on the government, on the institutions, to make sure that there's equality, substantive equality, not on the individual who has to go then and ask the manager to have a pay rise, which we shouldn't be in a position to, we shouldn't have to do that, not at all. And of course, 30,000 women a year are fired for being pregnant. That's unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable, unlawful, unacceptable. So we need to change the way we look at equality in order to make sure that the rights we already have are enforced and to get the government to move on certain issues. Yeah. Hello, Cornwall. Can the government refuse to allow CEDAW? Yes, it can. It can refuse to incorporate CEDAW into domestic law, but it has already ratified it. So it's supposed to do it anyway. It's just in breach of its own laws. We're talking about incorporating CEDAW into domestic law so that we can enforce those rights much better. And that's where I want to get to, and to change the way we look at equality. Lots to do. Let us know how we can help promote and intend doing regular lives monthly. I can do, but don't give me a platform, because I'll be all over it, and I'll be doing the PowerPoint presentation that I've prepared, and teaching all about, going into teaching mode. I'm not sure you wanted me to do that, but yeah, I'm happy. And there'll be other people who will do Facebook Live, I'm sure, as well, and talk about CEDAW. Excuse me. There's a launch tomorrow of something very important, because I'll be wrapping up in a few minutes, because I've talked quite a lot already. Something very important coming up tomorrow that we'll be launching, and it's a film and a crowdfunder. Please do consider donating a few pounds if you can, or millions if you've got it, no problem. Joe Bezos, maybe, he's got 121 billion or something. Anyone know him? Anyone get his email address or phone number? That would be great. Benefactor would be very nice, so we can get this started and get it off the ground. Without pushing in different ways to try and get CEDAW incorporated, to try and get our rights asserted, so that the next generation and our generation can have full equality that transforms our society for men, women, girls and boys and everyone for the better. We need to push forward. In order to fulfill and complete the tribunal, we need a little bit of money as well. Not for myself, I won't be taking a fee for this. This is my life's work, my passion, so I'll be going forward. But for others who work very, very hard behind the scenes on this, and getting the legals right on this, very, very important as well. So please do consider if you've got a couple of quid. But tomorrow we'll be launching a film as well. So watch this space for Back to 60 and the lovely Jasper who created the film. Absolutely wonderful. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely. Get the popcorn out and sit and watch it tomorrow and share widely. Please tell everyone about what we're trying to do here, and watch this space as well, and tell everyone about the Facebook, the website, and the Twitter account, so that we get more and more supporters for this. And do tell anyone of any age, please. Do tell everyone. Well, I hope you've enjoyed, to some extent at least, the Facebook Live. We will be doing more, and there'll be other people on board as well. So thank you very much for Martin and Hannah and everyone in the background for helping out, setting this up, because I'm not very good at these things. And thank you so much for the questions as well. And thank you for your support. And thank you for the wonderful work that everyone else in the steering committee and others are doing too and going forward. Thanks so much. Bye, guys. Stay safe and stay happy. Bye. Is that all right?